Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Vacation Rentals and Hotels. We had previously advertised it as Versus, but this is more inclusive. Welcome to HEDNA's webinar on the current state and future outlook of vacation rentals and hotels. As it is a HEDNA event, we abide to the code of conduct, which is posted on our website on hedna.org. And please review it at your leisure. But it is important that we follow, of course, the code of conduct throughout this event. My name is Sebastian Leitner. I'm the president of HEDNA, and I'm excited to welcome our panelists today. If you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, please. This is a part of a series of events. You will find on our website the current catalog of events. So today we're covering hotels and vacation rentals. In about a month, we will be doing a President's Roundtable on payments, and you will see us also posting a fall HEDNA at Home event very shortly. One more slide, please. I'm joined by two industry experts. One is Katie Moro, joining us, if I'm not mistaken, from New Orleans, and Jade Tinsley, joining us from London in the UK. Welcome, everyone. Do you guys want to, maybe Jade, say a few words of what you do and who you are?
Yeah, sure. So, so basically, I was previously a revenue manager at a London-based vacation rental property management company. And following my experience there, dealing with all the revenue management stuff, and it was a fairly large company, I joined Transparent, and we're a vacation rental data company, and we analyze all the vacation rental listings globally to form insights to help all sorts of businesses across the industry, and of course hotels and tourism bodies and things. And we build data insights through our data dashboards, and so we're here to provide some of those insights for everyone today.
Excellent. Over to you, Katie.
Yes, and my name is Katie Moro. I work on the BI product team at Amadeus. I'm sure you're all familiar with Amadeus. I have been here almost 12 years. I actually started in the hospitality industry, working in operations and then sales and revenue management before I started with Rubicon, who was then acquired by TravelClick, who was then acquired by Amadeus. So I've been with all three companies, but working on the Demand 360 product mostly, and that's most of the data that I'll talk to today. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for having me.
Excellent, excellent. All right, a couple of things related to logistics. So we have Jenna on site from EWAL, from our association management company. If you have any technical problems accessing, viewing the slides, hearing the audio, feel free to use the chat function. And she will help and assist you in any way. We have great experts with Jade and Katie. We welcome your questions. Use the Q&A button. If anything is unclear or you have specific questions to our panelists, please feel free to reach out via the Q&A function. We will be conducting polls, and this is really to get your feedback and insights and create some insights around this event and this topic. We will publish a recording on our HEDNA TV channel on YouTube. And of course, the slides that we're presenting today will be made available to our HEDNA members on hedna.org. So without further ado, why don't we warm things up with a quick poll around this specific topic? And of course, we are in travel. So summertime is vacation travel and vacation time. However, our options have changed. Have you taken a vacation or traveled as usual? You see all the responses, and we'd love to hear from you. So why don't you just, provide us with your feedback and answer. It makes us know that you're alive and that you're there and you're paying attention. And of course, more importantly, that you're getting comfortable with the tool and you're ready to ask your questions as we go through the content. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Katie and Jade to walk us through this amazing content that you're about to witness. Over to you guys.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Great. So I'm going to start with talking about hotels, but As always, I like to just clarify the data that we're looking at. So this is the data from our Demand 360 product from Amadeus. This is based on about 30,000 hotels globally that provide on the books data to us. So we get group block, group pickup, and all transient rooms sold looking out a year, and as well looking back a year. So today we will look at some future data for hotels and vacation rentals, but also we'll look at some of the trends that we're seeing historically. But before I turn it over to Jade to give a little bit more information on the vacation rentals, I think it's good just to kind of take a step back and say, what has happened to the hotel industry, right? And so what we're looking at here are reservations in red, the cancellations in blue, and then net reservations in orange. So these are the reservations based on those 30,000 hotels globally and what has happened in each week since the beginning of the year. So you can see that we started out the year very strong. If you're looking at the net reservations, that's pretty much the key metric on here. Started off the year very strong, and as you got into really the thick of COVID, March 15th, we're in the negative, where there were more cancellations than bookings throughout the industry during that time period. Slowly but surely, as you all know, we're starting to see more positive movement. And right now, reservations are continuing to grow and cancellations look like they're starting to flatten. So if you're looking all the way to the right, actually between the weeks of July 26th and August 2nd, the number of cancellations dropped. So of course, that's the trend we want to see as cancellations go down and reservations continue to go up. But definitely positive movement. I know we still have a lot of opportunity to have higher occupancies in certain markets, and we'll talk through some of that. But overall, as an industry, we're definitely moving in the right direction, and I hope that we can continue to see that into the fall. Jade, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, we've got some. Okay, let me quit this slide. Hopefully, we can see it a little better. Maybe not. Okay, well this chart doesn't look like it's loading just now, which isn't too helpful. But just a background on our data from the vacation rental side. So we as a company, we're looking always at 35 million vacation rental listings globally. So that's everything on the main OTAs, Airbnb, Vrbo, and Booking.com as well. And by analysing all of those, we can pull together global insights. So that includes the reservations, which were the kind of the main topic of this slide. I'm trying to think whether maybe I'll try and find this graph through a different source that we can look at later, because I can't seem to see it. I don't know whether you guys can. But yeah, basically it was just showing the story really of the reservations through the year, and a very similar story, as you can imagine, to the hotel side, with the dip through the height of the pandemic for all of our main supply nations, and then coming back up towards the current time. So yeah, very very similar to the hotel data. And hopefully missing that graph hasn't taken away from things too much. And I know, so now we're moving on to looking at reservations across kind of the main world regions. So I think we've got, yeah, so this is me up first with the vacation rental data. Yeah, when we talk about reservations here, we actually have the percentage change, the difference between reservations that have been made this year in each week relative to the same week of last year. So that's reservations made, not checked in. So we can see exactly how many bookings have been made for vacation rentals every week relative to the same week in 2019, with that dotted broken red line there. And our first chart, we're looking at the North American hotels and vacation rentals. So we can immediately see the difference there, with vacation rentals still enjoying huge growth ahead of the pandemic. But then, of course, the bookings tumbling in the wake of the first deaths and travel restrictions in the US and Canada. So with the nature of the industry, we'll see this pattern occurring a few times, but as we might expect, vacation rentals climb out of that depletion in bookings a little bit more quickly than hotels. And already we're up to minus 21% by the beginning of August. So that's basically, we're seeing around 4/5 of the reservations right now that we did in the same week last year.
Yep, and for hotels, the story is not as good, right? So the lines are very similar as far as the dip and the, as we start to come out of the bottom, but we're definitely not to the numbers that the vacation rental market is seeing. So I want you to keep in mind that, we're down 50%. We know that there are some markets in North America that are doing extremely well. Some of the ones we'll talk about today, some resort areas, mountain areas, are seeing great numbers, some doing even better than last year. But the major markets where the majority of the inventory are still struggling very much. And so that's why we continue to see this pretty drastic decline. And I'll talk about this as we go through this webinar, and definitely towards the end, that as hoteliers, we definitely need to be mindful of the vacation rental business, and definitely be looking, as an added competitor, somebody that we have to be mindful of, because the traveler sentiment really has started to shift a little bit, and people are booking these vacation rentals more than hotels. So it's definitely something we need to be mindful of. All right, so moving on to Europe. Listen, I think that if you compare Europe to North America, where, especially United States, where the majority of hotels sit in North America, the restrictions were lifted much quicker than restrictions in Europe. So you can kind of see the hotels take that dip and really stay at the bottom for a little bit longer than we saw in North America. But similar to vacation rentals, you kind of start to see the climbing back up of the reservations, especially as we get into August, and definitely more of a vacation time. And I know that there are many people that I work with that are taking vacations in Europe now. So I think as we get into August, we'll see that number climb back up a little bit. And so it'll be very interesting to see how do hotels do compared to the vacation rentals, through the month of August. But we definitely still have a long way to go when looking compared to last year, which is really a very hard thing to look at today. That historical reference is kind of useless at this point. But when you look at that gap between hotels and vacation rentals, still a lot of opportunity for hotel growth. So we'll continue to monitor that. And again, I'll talk at the end about ways that hotels can kind of think about things differently, potentially, to be able to compete in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in the vacation rentals, we can see an echo of the trends that we saw in the previous slide in North America, really, for vacation rentals as well. That initial growth ahead of the pandemic in January was a bit less strong than it was in North America. And also the drop off to kind of our rock bottom, if you like, was a bit starker in Europe. We hit minus 94% in reservations relative to North America, which had a steadier decline and only down to minus 83%. So things were a little bit darker, definitely in Europe. And as Katie said, the restrictions held out a little longer. Again, vacation rentals have recovered a little quicker. But the point we're at now at minus 35% is, again, a little bit less positive than what we saw in North America. So, it's less positive in that sense, but again, both sectors are moving in the right direction. Okay, so we're moving on now to Asia Pacific. And again, we have a similar pattern of events, but things actually dropped off more gradually here, which, you know, we would guess is likely as a result of less certainty and awareness around the pandemic, the point of it surging. Similarly, the recovery has been less decisive as well. Unlike hotels, vacation rentals have seen the least significant recovery in this region. So as you can see, the recovery in vacation rentals hasn't shot up way ahead of that solid hotel line there, and actually are still down, you know, over half of the bookings that we saw at this point last year.
Yeah, and I mean, similar to vacation rentals, you know, if you compare this chart for hotels to North America and Europe, we're definitely seeing a different type of recovery. And what I would say is that the hotel number probably looks a little bit better than the vacation rental, because really in most countries in Asia, there is maybe some domestic travel, but there's a lot more restrictions, especially border closures, that have really hindered that leisure traveler that has been pretty prevalent in North America and Europe. That's helped the vacation rental space. So the numbers that we're seeing, we need to be very mindful, right? That in most countries, like take Singapore as an example, their hotel occupancies looked pretty good, but most of that was set aside for any people coming back that needed to quarantine, those types of things. So the hotel usage was not about real demand, yet, you know, we still saw strong occupancy numbers. So that comes into play here when we're looking at what is perceived as, you know, positive movement. China makes up a large portion of these numbers, and we know that there's, you know, government mandates that are trying to stimulate demand there. So that plays into the positive kind of hotel outlook compared to vacation rental today. But you do see, again, that it's very up and down. And what we saw in Beijing as an example, when there was a new outbreak, everything just dropped right down before it started to come right back up. So as there are outbreaks throughout most countries in Asia Pacific, you know, you all of a sudden see that drop, and then you see it start to come up again. And so that is, to me, what's really causing this constant up and down recovery that we're not seeing in other parts of the world. So we'll see. I mean, you know, New Zealand has new cases and they were doing really well. So we'll see how these restrictions continue to play out. But in my mind, Jade, for vacation rentals, it will be a longer recovery until borders are open and more leisure travel is able to happen. So,
yeah, for sure. Okay, so we're sticking with the reservations data now, but we're going to focus in on specific markets. So of course we can't look at every market in the session today, but we're trying to focus in on different types of markets and locations, just to give you an idea of you know, how each kind of market is handling things and what everyone's experiencing. So we're starting off with New York here.
So I'm going to start off here looking at talking about the hotel. So I think it's really no surprise to anyone that New York is struggling, right? With the lack of corporate business, and, you know, many offices I'm hearing are not going to open up until June of next year, which is going to, you know, be a struggle to get corporate business back. The slow openings of businesses, right, meaning restaurants and the like. So a lot of Broadway as another example, right? So without that, you know, opportunity for more leisure type of entertainment, that's hurting the leisure business. The lack of international travelers. So New York is definitely feeling the pain, similar to many other major markets in the United States, at least. So it would be a similar chart if you looked at Chicago or San Francisco or wherever. but definitely, you know, down still 66% as far as reservations being made compared to that same week last year. So I don't know what this outlook looks like. We're continuing, of course, to monitor our future data and trying to see, you know, we're starting to see some movement in Q1, some positive movement, but I think it's going to be, you know, I'm not a Debbie Downer, but I think it's going to be a tough road to recovery throughout the fall in New York City. And I'll let Jade talk about the vacation rentals, but you can see it's kind of in the same spot.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, Katie, it's definitely more of a challenge for our sort of typically urban markets, as we'll see as we progress through the next slides. And they, you know, they don't fall into the realms of you know, some of the demand that we are seeing picking back up. So they're definitely, it looks, as you said, like a longer road to recovery and a bit of a learning curve for these major cities. But, you know, as far as the vacation rentals are concerned in New York, we can see that the drop-off is actually more gradual, but also, you know, as far as the bottom is concerned, more severe than hotels. And whilst we've climbed back up, you know, similarly as with other markets, quicker than hotels, we have dropped right back off again. You know, as the travel restrictions and everything are persisting, and the cases, and obviously things have been very severe in New York, so we're back down to 70% under what we saw at this time last year, having enjoyed kind of a brief respite there with people making some bookings. So we've come all the way down to minus 92% around the 29th of March there. And then now, as I said, only at minus 74%, so actually enjoying fewer reservations relative to last year than hotels are.
Yeah, and just to note, Jade, just on that, the reason I feel that you had the bigger drop off is because, again, like I mentioned in the Asia Pacific countries, because the situation was so severe in New York, many hotels were being used to house nurses and doctors, so that occupancy was really driven by you know, people related to the pandemic. Nothing around real demand, right? So that's why you didn't have, you probably dipped a little bit lower than the hotels for that reason.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and you know, there was some attempts to mobilize vacation rentals or alternative accommodation for that purpose, but obviously, as with the nature of vacation rentals being you know, a pro for some of these demand cases, it was also a bit of a negative for kind of trying to mobilize that stock for a centralized purpose. So definitely that's accounted for some of the kind of stabilization of the hotel side. Yeah,
for sure. So moving into Paris, so I would say a similar story to New York, right, where the drop off for hotels was very severe right as the pandemic really hit, and kind of stayed at the bottom longer, like I mentioned, just because there were more restrictions. But we're just not seeing too much growth. I mean, you can kind of see a little bit of an upward trend as we get into August, and we know that you know, obviously August, a big vacation time in Europe, so we expected to see a little bit more demand. And I think Jade's talked about, and we'll talk about some of the smaller markets where that's where we're actually seeing that demand come in, or smaller markets, resort areas, those types. So Paris really didn't see the benefit of kind of this vacation time. And so we see that in the hotels here. And I'll let Jade talk about the vacation rentals, but similar to New York, you kind of see the vacation rentals have a nice peak there in that June time period, but it seems similar to New York, Jade, where it kind of drops off as we got closer to August.
Yeah, absolutely, Casey. It's a very similar picture. As you can imagine, it's, you know, a similar market, and it's also been quite badly affected by the pandemic. So yeah, very similar actually, minus 75% at the beginning of August. So we've seen that earlier climb, but once again, it's dropped back down, and actually hotels and vacation rentals sitting at a very similar point at the beginning of August there. So I guess it's the same with New York. It's going to be a longer road, and we have to kind of learn and understand that demand in these markets, and try and keep things moving in the right direction. So now we're going to start looking at the more non-urban markets. So starting off with Jackson, Wyoming, and as you can see, you know, whilst the trend loosely follows what we've seen before, things do look very different towards this end of the year. So the picture here is distinctly more positive. It's in line with the trends we've been seeing in terms of a huge upswing in non-urban reservations. So as you can see from the 24th of May there, we hit huge heights as things opened up a little, and people realized that they could get their vacations in, and they went immediately running towards that non-urban stock there. So whilst things dipped once more at the end of July, bookings have actually been largely up on 2019 numbers since mid-May, really. And vacation rentals are seeing over 50% more bookings at the beginning of August than what they were seeing for the same week last year. So obviously a much more positive picture for both sides there, Katie.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've talked a lot about this within Amadeus and putting information out, you know, through social channels to talk about, you know, these are the types of markets that we're seeing strong demand. And, you know, somebody asked a question here, Guido, asking about what are some of the secondary markets. So I don't even know the names of all of these markets because some of them, to be honest, I learned existed during this time period, but a lot of strength in South Dakota, Wyoming, markets like Asheville, and then in Florida, really the Panhandle was driving a lot of business, especially over 4th of July and Memorial Day weekend. South Texas. So for, you know, specifically in the United States, that's where we're seeing a lot of very, very strong demand. So here, you know, I thought it was very interesting when Jade and I put together this slide. I mean, the lines are very, very similar. So hotel not as strong as vacation rental. And, you know, I know we were asking some polling questions, and I took my kids to Asheville a few weeks ago, and we did rent a house too. So I'm trying to help this industry as much as I can, but that was, you know, a good opportunity to kind of get away from everything. And so I think a lot of people have that same mindset. So the hotel not as strong, but could be coming from a different base as well. So we would have to kind of look at that, but still very positive growth. And, you know, some of these markets are doing really well throughout the pandemic. So that's good to see.
Yeah, for sure. And we're looking now at Nice in France, which is, you know, somewhat urban, but really primarily we're talking about a beach market here. And it's also managed to break positive in terms of vacation rental reservations, at least through most of July, actually. But whilst pushing closer to the surface all through the pandemic than hotels, vacation rental reservations now sit more negative with respect to their last year numbers than hotels do, actually. So although a sharp drop is seen at the end of July, and the differential to last year is likely largely explained by this kind of newer spike in cases in France, the natural seasonality of the market does expect a little bit of a drop in reservations here, but obviously not quite to that degree. I think people have, and this is a trend we're seeing across lots of analysis, that people have kind of rushed to get their vacations in and vacations booked. And that initial rush has kind of died down a little bit. So we find ourselves now back down at minus 41%. So again, lower than hotels. But as I said, at least through July, vacation rentals have picked up a little bit more revenue to recover that little bit more through July.
Yes, and I mean, there's really not too much to say on the hotel side, right? We just have not seen the recovery, in Nice specifically. Still, you know, very much down to what we were doing last year. Yes, you see some positive movement, but it's definitely not where we need or want it to be. It will be interesting to see how the rest of August pans out, like I mentioned. And, to be honest, it's going to be interesting to me. I don't know about Nice specifically, but I'm hearing more and more that people are, if their kids are going back to school virtual and they're working from home, I think they're calling it a flexcation now, where maybe they're going to wait and take their vacation when it's not as popular. And seeing that in Europe, most people are in August and trying to all go to the same types of locations. Maybe if you wait until September, there's a little bit more, less people, those types of things. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, and if we see on the vacation rental and the hotel side, if we see some still positive movement throughout the fall, where it's not necessarily, a strong vacation time. So it'll be interesting to continue to watch for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now we can move on to our next metric. We're looking now at how occupancy has reflected the pandemic. So a slightly different look from here on out. And we're back to North America here, the first of our kind of world regions. And as you'd expect, occupancy, it takes a little longer to feel the effects of that tentative demand we've been experiencing. So whilst we saw the first decline in vacation rental bookings as early as January in North America, occupancy really falls away towards the end of March. We see a familiar kind of trough then, and this time, so we're looking, to be clear, this is all vacation rental data. And the dotted line there is last year, and the solid line is this year. So you can see the difference between the two traces there, starting off pretty similarly, and then really experiencing that trough that we saw in a little earlier on in demand. So yeah, we've seen a bit of stability really since week 28, which was the second week of July this year, and so that's a bit more encouraging. Obviously, we're sitting around kind of 8-10% below what we were at last year, but at least some stability has been regained for vacation rentals, and the occupancy is currently sitting at 62%, which isn't, all things considered, isn't too bad, I don't think, Katie.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially when you compare it to hotels, right? So, what we're looking at here are hotel occupancies, 2019, 2020, as of the beginning of this month or last week, and that's, we're comparing from a pace standpoint. So you can see, obviously, hotels are, down substantially to where we were last year, which is really no surprise to anybody. Something to keep in mind if you're not as familiar with our data is that we don't have in our data today some of the very low-end hotels that are actually, I think, seeing pretty good occupancies in many markets, mostly because they're in secondary and tertiary markets that are still seeing some demand. And I think they're being used also for, again, traveling nurses, those types of things. So I think if you added that in, it might be a little bit higher from an occupancy standpoint than, the 37.6 that we're looking at. But we're looking at high-end hotels or higher-end hotels, upscale hotels, and so they're just not seeing the occupancy. And like I mentioned before, most of the inventory in the major markets, which is the majority of inventory in this country, you're just not seeing the occupancy. And I haven't really spoken so much about Canada, but obviously, with more restrictions in Canada and the border closure with the United States, that usually drives a lot of occupancy, especially in the summer months for vacation to Vancouver and some of those places. We're just not, the Canadian hotels are just not seeing the occupancies because of that. So, still still have a ways to go to get to last year, as we all know. And I'll talk a little bit more at the end on like, how do we get creative as an industry, right? When leisure travel is not here as much, moving into September through the rest of the year, what's our plan as an industry? And I think, we have to definitely come together and be creative on how we're going to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I mean, the demand is there. We can see that, especially looking at least at some of these vacation rental charts, we can see that people are still booking and are still visiting. So
Yep.
there are some positives to take, and it's all about how we tackle the shape of the demand, if you like. So in European vacation rentals, we're actually seeing a similar story to the North American story. We've got a predictable start to the year, followed by a complete lack of occupancy from around mid-March there, and things not looking any better really until around week 27. So that's the beginning of July. So just slightly ahead of North America there. Again, similar story. From mid-July, we've seen the occupancy kind of following that expected seasonal trend for Europe, but just around 10% lower than for 2019. So again, very similar to North America, and at least some positive take homes there.
Yeah, and on the hotel side, I mean, similar to what Jade just mentioned, there is an increase that you're starting to see. Really, week 24 starts to move up, but really week 27 and beyond, definitely on a positive slope there. So that's very good to see. Obviously, at the 30% mark, we're not near vacation rentals from an occupancy standpoint, and that gap to last year is still pretty wide. But to me, I'll take the positive movement, and hopefully we continue to see that line go up. So,
yeah, for sure. And the story is slightly different for Asia Pacific, where vacation rentals are concerned. Similar shape, but unlike North America and Europe, the vacation rental occupancy in Asia Pacific didn't actually exceed or equal last year's levels at the beginning of 2020. And with the pandemic having an earlier presence in this region of the world, it's perhaps unsurprising actually to see around 10% less occupancy than last year around the beginning of the year. However, things really start going south there from the end of February, and still now actually, despite starting to pick up around the same time as those other regions, occupancy is barely breaking the 25% barrier, which is, especially bleak for some of these countries in this region that are relying so heavily on tourism there. But again, I mean, things have moved in the right direction, just a little bit more reluctantly, I guess.
Yeah, and for hotels, I mean, this is definitely a higher occupancy than we're seeing in other regions. And again, like I mentioned earlier, probably mostly led by China, where we're definitely seeing signs of recovery. No matter how the business is happening, there is business, and so that's really good to see. And I'm hoping that as long as cases can stay under control and restrictions start to ease in other Asian countries, then we'll start to see that, at least within Asia, that international travel come back. And I'm hopeful that that number will continue to rise as we start to see more movement within the different countries in Asia. But it's still in a positive movement. So that's what we like to see. Might take some time, but we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're moving on a little bit now. So once again, we're going to hone our analysis down to those specific locations to try and understand what's happening in certain types of markets. But this time, we're looking at current occupancy for the full 2020 year. So in other words, those first 32 weeks shown are achieved occupancy, while 33 onwards, that's current on the books occupancy. So of course, this should increase in the meantime. in ordinary circumstances. We'd only expect to see that go up, really. But of course, with what's going on in the world at the moment, we could, of course, see a decrease as well. So that's worth remembering. And as you can see, we've got New York City again starting us off. And where at the start of the year, occupancy was already down 10%. The first real twist away from that seasonal demand was week 10, which is around the second week of March this year, and slightly ahead of the general trend in North America there, as the first affected place. We see that trough really kicking in, and again that kind of just lack of occupancy for that period of time there. Week 26, we saw the first real improvement, and current reservations have the occupancy levels meeting and exceeding last year's levels from around early November. So, a more positive outlook looking forward. But as I mentioned, this, hopefully will continue to rise, but realistically, there's also a risk that this will fall as well.
Yeah, and on the hotel side, I mean, you can see the gap really starting in week 7 or 8 all the way through to what we've already achieved, right? Like Jade said. But looking into the future, and if you've been on any webinars with me in the past, we have to be very, very mindful of pace data, right? When I look at this, I think, oh, this is fantastic. Like, we're only a little bit behind pace, but that is very deceiving because the booking window is so short. 0 to 7 days is really where we're seeing the majority of reservations come in. So we would have to start to really pick up on the reservation side to be able to meet last year's numbers. I don't even know if it's mathematically possible at this time, but something to be mindful of, that if you're looking at even in your own hotels, your pace year over year, be mindful of the fact that the booking window is so short, it's going to be hard to get to that point. So right now, looking out, it doesn't look so bad, but we have to continue to monitor that. And if the booking window doesn't change, it's going to be really hard to catch up to last year, especially with the lack of group.
And Katie, if I may just quickly jump in, Inder had a great question that was very contextual. Are the occupancy you're showing here on an absolute basis, meaning they sort of is everything that is in the market or everything that is available for sale, meaning some properties may be closed? Do you know?
Yep. It's a very good question, and I actually wanted to mention it. So we have decided as a company to keep all inventory in because hotels were opening and closing left and right. So while this number may seem lower because there's, there could be more availability, I guess. We decided that it was better to really have a true picture when comparing, especially year over year. So all hotels are included, whether they're closed or not.
Thank you.
Yeah, so moving on to Paris again here, and much like the reservations side, the patterns are quite similar to what we saw in New York. Interestingly, occupancy at the beginning of the year was already down 10% on the previous year. Again, with week 10 seeing the start of that downturn, and week 27 the start of the recovery, and occupancy actually again on course to meet occupancy of last year, but this time around late November. So you could argue marginally less positive for Paris, but really, as Katie and I was saying on the previous slide as well, this is all very tentative at the moment. So positive that we're creeping back towards the levels we saw last year, but we have to take it all with a pinch of salt and really keep trying to push things in the right direction, I think.
Perfect. And so I'm going to let you look at Paris here. I want to be mindful of the time. So we still do have a few more slides that we want to get through, especially towards the end. So Paris, very similar to New York, right? Where towards the end of the year, it looks as though we are very close to last year numbers. But as we get closer in that booking window, if it stays as short as it is, it's going to be a little bit harder to be able to outpace last year.
Okay, so predictably, we're seeing a different picture. We turn our attention to those less urban markets once again. So the downturn felt in a very similar way, and the incline again at a similar time, but that recovery has been distinctly more immediate and stronger. So within 2 weeks, occupancy in Jackson actually went from 11% up to 70% there, exceeding the same week of 2019. From that point in week 28, so that's around mid-July, occupancy is set to exceed 2019 levels for the rest of the year, actually, finishing on 34% over the normal 18%. I say normal, of course, referring to the last year. So a much more positive picture at this stage. And it reinforces our feeling that people are willing to travel, just takes the right kind of situation and offering there. So again, hopefully that keeps positive.
I don't think the slide moved, Jade.
Oh, really? It's moved for me. So
oh, okay. Okay. Jade. Oh, okay. And so, so for hotels, very similar. As you look into the end of the year, the numbers are very close. And the one thing I'll say that's a little bit different than when you're talking about New York or Paris that are typically corporate driven, even outside of COVID, short booking window, short lead times, a place like Jackson, Wyoming, this is more of a planned time, right? Skiing over Thanksgiving or the Christmas holidays, those types of things. So to me, this isn't a better situation. Of course, there could still be things that happen like cancellations, et cetera, based on where we are as a country at that time. But right now, definitely still seems to be positive. And although down to last year for the majority of this year, still with pretty strong and all positive numbers. So it's a pretty good situation in Jackson.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, Nice, one of these less urban markets, we see a similar story to Jackson, although a bit less impressive in terms of surpassing last year's occupancy levels. But at least things from here looking a bit more comparable to what we've seen last year. So yeah, similar story, just trying to keep above that line there.
Yep, and in the hotel side, still down to last year's numbers from an on the books occupancy standpoint. So again, we'll have to continue to monitor that to see if people still are looking to vacation throughout the rest of the year. Because of kind of the more flexibility with the work and school situation. So again, continue to monitor that, but still obviously not to where we were last year. All right, so I think the last part we wanted to do is just look at the distribution breakdown. Just a quick, high-level look at where are all these reservations coming from. Like Jade's mentioned a couple of times, people are still traveling to maybe different places and different types of accommodations, but people are still traveling, and where are they booking? So I'll let Jade talk about vacation rental first, and then I'll do a high-level look at hotels.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, Katie, this is a high level look really at vacation rental listings all across the world. So as you can see, we've got 14 million total listings we're talking about here live on those platforms. And this is really just to give you an overview of where those listings are, which sites they're sitting on. So we can see Airbnb edging out Booking.com there, but really it depends which country you're joining from today, because Booking.com obviously a lot stronger in Europe, as a general idea, and Vrbo of course stronger in the US and North America than in Europe. But that's the overall kind of global split we're looking at. And then this chart here is just showing the percentage difference in nights booked each week across those three main OTAs, if you like. Expedia there, speaking for Vrbo also. So we can see just each week how many nights have been booked on each of those platforms relative to last year. So yeah, creeping towards 30% under what we saw last year for Airbnb and Booking.com. Obviously a little bit all over the place, and a little bit of a switch around as well from the beginning of the year before this all took hold, where Booking.com were kind of winning the day to start with. Airbnb really have seen a much more positive recovery than the other two. Obviously a lot of the demand being seen there, but all three moving kind of decidedly in the right direction at the beginning of August.
And so what I decided to show just from the hotel side was really just brand.com and OTA. Of course, there's other channels like the GDS and direct on property, which is actually growing quite nicely. I think people are just more concerned about their stay and calling the property directly. But what we're looking at here is the percent difference, again, this year versus last, in nights booked by week. And you can see at the beginning of the year where brand.com was actually doing quite well compared to the OTAs, but as we got really into COVID and then beyond, really they became neck and neck. And as we get into really week 27 and beyond, you see the strength of the OTA actually beating out brand.com as far as reservations booked. What I will tell you is that we are seeing, although still a small portion of the business, we're seeing strong opaque growth. So something to be mindful of is if you're a hotelier, it's business that's a little different than what we're used to seeing. So I think that that's where the OTAs are having a lot of their strength is in the opaque business, very close to arrival. So I think that that's where that strength is coming from. Okay, so we're just going to take you through a few takeaways. So this was fun to put together, right? It's definitely a new landscape, new for us as well. And how can we really, survive together in this industry with decreased demand and really a different type of traveler? And so we came up with a few different takeaways. So first, for hoteliers, I think we've always had information about alternative accommodations, but prior to COVID, there was enough demand for everybody, and it maybe wasn't taken as seriously as a competitor. But I feel right now it's critical to expand your competitive set to have alternative accommodations in there. So there are ways to look at it that makes it comparable to your hotel, whether it's 1 bedroom versus 2 bedroom. You can compare regular rooms to suites, all those different options. But I think it's very, very important to understand the demand coming in, and then maybe how do you position your hotel a little bit differently if there is demand actually coming in but being taken by vacation rentals. Number 2, challenge your distribution strategy. So listen, I don't know everything about this and I won't pretend to know, but are there different sites that you could be on, especially if you're a resort property, known for a longer length of stay? Are there different sites that you could join that the new traveler right now is using? So could you be on Vrbo as a hotel? I don't know the answer to that, but could you? Are there package sites that potentially you would want to be on to get more exposure to maybe a different type of audience? So I think maybe thinking a little bit differently about your distribution strategy and not relying on the standard sites that we're used to in the hotel space. Optimizing OTA preferencing. So I thought this was quite interesting. I really didn't even know this existed, but if you go on booking.com and you put like a longer length of stay, they actually offer a section called top picks for long stays. And within that, there were hotels as well as vacation rentals. And are you on that list? Do you need to talk to your market manager at Booking to get on that list? But if people are looking for longer lengths of stay and there's the option between a vacation rental and your hotel, what are you doing to stand out? And so that's something I think definitely to look on in more resort areas especially, or mountain areas as well. Think outside of the box. So listen, I mean, this is such an easy thing to say, but as we're talking about some of this and trying to think of ways to continue to drive leisure business throughout the fall, to kind of make up for the fact that you'll have less corporate and probably not a lot of group, we were trying to find different ways. So for me, I have 3 kids, right? So if I want to do a weekend getaway, I need something that's going to entertain them, maybe just like a change of scenery, right? So I found a hotel in Texas that offers an aquatic suite where you can sleep under the sea, and then it connects to a king room for parents. How awesome is that if you are a young family trying to travel and entertain your children? Is that hotel actually promoting that suite to their repeat customers that have kids? I have no idea, to be honest, but they need to be, right? They need to be marketing to everyone local in their area and any of their repeat customers with children, and even broader than that if they can, to sell that one experience, right? People are looking for experiences. And then also just totally outside of the box, I'm not sure if you saw that the last Blockbuster store in the world became an Airbnb. So you can spend the night at that store and rent movies while you sleep there. And I mean, how unique is that, right? And so I think as a hotel industry, I did a podcast way back in June, and the gentleman I did it with talked about we are going to have to totally rethink travel. And I think that we're going to have to challenge ourselves as an industry. How do you set yourself apart? And how do you how can you take some of that share of that demand that's coming in that right now is maybe choosing a vacation rental over a hotel? So Jade, I'll let you take the last two.
No, definitely. I think the first take home from what we've looked at is that these patterns of demand, they've been quite similar across the sectors, really, and the whole hospitality industry has experienced this big impact, and hopefully we'll all continue to kind of climb out of it. But we have seen a positive picture, maybe more on the vacation rental side in a lot of the markets, but in different types of markets as well, we've started to see that demand kicking back in. So in having saying that, it's obviously quite nervous demand and quite fickle. And I think, as you touched on, Katie, I think this highlights the real need, both where hotel and vacation rental management are concerned, the need to keep your finger on that pulse of demand, and also to consider the shape of it. And so, really thinking about your data sources and how you're keeping on top of that stuff. So for hotel companies offering those vacation rental options, but also, if you're not, as a hotel company, if you're just trying to consider vacation rentals within your competitive set, it's very important to understand the demand that both sides are experiencing. So whether that's length of stay, booking channel, lead time, and so on. Super important to understand that and really to tailor your strategy around it, especially with the demand so unpredictable and different right now. So following on from that, really, vacation rental booking lead times on the main OTAs that we're looking at, so Airbnb, Booking.com, and Vrbo, the lead times are actually up 8% in 2020, up to 51 days. So Airbnb have seen a marginal drop, but for the most part, that lead time has been extended. And also, as we touched on, there are other trends, including non-urban markets seeing, in some cases, in excess of double the demand that urban markets are seeing. And we've seen length of stay also fluctuating and leaning a bit more towards those midterm stays as well. So yeah, ultimately, I think it comes back to that point of understanding what the demand is in your market and for the different types of property and different types of market, and trying to really make the most of what demand there is under these circumstances.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, Jade, it's like, if you think about a 4 to 9 night length of stay and, the conveniences of being in a home, how can a hotel maybe replicate some of those conveniences, right? Maybe it's a full-size refrigerator in a suite as opposed to a minibar fridge. Maybe the family could have their own breakfast as opposed to having to eat at 3 meals a day at a restaurant in the hotel. So some of those types of things, if you want to capture that 51-day lead time, which hotels, we need more business in the longer lead times, and that length of stay is amazing, fantastic, right? So how do you adjust your value proposition for your suites, especially to be able to accommodate that guest for a longer length of stay. So I think there's some definite opportunities out there, and I think your point's very valid. It's like just keeping your finger on the pulse of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, guys. I think we need to wrap up because we're approaching the hour. I for sure miss room service. Right? I'm so sick and tired of cooking myself. I've been doing this for my whole family for the last 4 months, and I do miss a lot. So I miss hotels a lot. So anyway, on that bombshell, let's wrap up the few last slides. I just want to call it a few things. We're not doing the poll. We're out of time. We have some great questions. I'll be sharing them with both Katie and Jade, who can pick up the conversations directly with you guys. Here are some upcoming, I guess, events for reference. And then please, one more slide. And then I think we have, the recording will be available on hedna.org, as well as on our YouTube channels, and the slides will be available to our HEDNA members. If it's okay with Katie and Jade, we'll share contact details with participants if they have follow-up questions to continue the conversation. But Katie and Jade, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I could have listened to you guys for another hour or so. I have plenty of follow-up questions. And unfortunately, we ran out of time, but this was great. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh,
thank you so much for having us. Yep.
All right. Take care, guys.
Great. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.